Hi there, and welcome to our first Business Book Live on LinkedIn. I'm really excited to be here today. It's something a bit different, we've not done before. So welcome to everyone who's watching. Please do let us know where you're joining from. And if you've got any questions throughout, please do comment or ask questions, because it'd be really good if we can make it as interactive as possible. So I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Gill and Alyson, who we work together as career coaches, and Rebecca, who I have met through a group that we're both members of. So I'm going to hand you over to each of those to just do a quick introduction. So Gill, do you want to start?
Yes, so good afternoon. I'm a career and executive coach. I also do a lot of leadership development as well. And so listening is a key part of the work I have to do. And so reading this book was really interesting.
Brilliant. Okay, and Rebecca, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Rebecca. I'm based up in sunny Scotland, although not so sunny today. I help businesses make better decisions by unraveling their data. So I take them from spreadsheets all over the place, apps collecting data that doesn't do anything, to actually meaningful input to decisions. I love business books. I read far too many of them. And I recommend my weekly favourites here on LinkedIn under the hashtag Business Book Bites. So very excited about this book. It's one of my top reads for this year. So excited to get stuck in.
Yeah, brilliant. And actually it was from Rebecca's review that I decided on this book, because I thought it was such a good review that she had done, and the book definitely didn't disappoint. And so Alyson, over to you.
Hi, Alyson Ainsworth. I'm also a career coach and executive coach, working alongside Sarah and Gill. I also have an interest and a background in mental health and a diploma in resilience coaching as well. So I do a lot of work with people who are struggling with change and difficulty with anxiety, with stress, etc. So that's a particular specialism of mine.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, ladies. We've got a couple of comments coming in. So Jane's saying hello from Heidelberg. So hi, Jane. And Paul is just round the corner in the kitchen. So hello to everyone. So thank you very much, and please do ask questions as we go through, as I said. So as I said, the book that we're going to be talking about was one that Rebecca mentioned. So it's Kate Murphy, You're Not Listening, Why That Matters. So it is such a good book, and we're going to be going through a couple of the key sections, but some of the reviews that I've found online saying it's a life-changing book, it's going to transform your conversations forever. How when we're at work, we're taught to lead the conversation. On social media, we shape our personal narratives. At parties, we talk over one another, and so do our politicians. And it actually goes into quite a lot of detail about that. Actually, that's one of the sections that's really good. And then just to summarise, really, we're not listening and no one is listening to us. So as I said, I picked 4 key areas, and we're going to start off with Alyson. So I'm going to put the first question up. So Alyson, the book talks about the lost art of listening and how that has had a severe impact on mental health. So can you expand a bit on this, please? So this is from chapter 1 for anyone that wants to have a read.
Of course, yes. And I think that one of the key points that Murphy makes is that, his modern life is not conducive to deep listening. We're all far too busy. We don't sit around and chat and share anecdotes and stories anymore. We communicate mostly via social media, via text, via post, via tweet. And therefore, we're only interested in the time it takes us to either scroll through a post or a message, which involves no listening at all. So, the whole thing about listening, true listening, is a skill. And again, the book goes into a lot of detail around this. And it says, some people seem to have forgotten that skill. I think particularly the younger generations, or maybe they didn't even learn it in the first place. As I say, growing up with social media is very difficult, and I'll touch on that. But there's a great question that she asks in the book that says, who is listening to you? Which I think for me is one of the biggest takeaways. And she said when she asked this question, when she was interviewing people, almost everybody paused or hesitated at that point and thought, oh, that's interesting. Then some people would say, well, actually, my friends do listen to me or whatever. But a lot of people struggle to answer that question. Who is listening to you? And listening at the end of the day, is it connects us into other people, and therefore, if you're not listening or not being listened to, you can feel quite isolated and disconnected from the world around you, and therefore the word loneliness comes up. And she talks a lot about the link between mental health and being lonely, and people get lonely for the lack of listening, is what she says. And actually, if you look on the Mind website, loneliness is actually classed as a mental illness now, which, again, if you think about what we've been through, but she's saying loneliness has severe impact. It's almost as significant in the cause of death as things like obesity and alcoholism or drugs combined. So it has a significant impact on us. There are some great statistics in the book, so I'm just going to refer to them briefly. And she talks about a pandemic of loneliness in terms of half of the survey she did, half the people she talked to, and this was done in America, said that they didn't have a meaningful personal interaction or an extended conversation on a daily basis with people. And that, think about how that has affected people, particularly over the last couple of years. And as a result of that, the suicide rates have gone up by 30% since 1999. And the Global World Health Organization reports that in the last 45 years, the suicide rates are up by 60% globally, which is a huge number. And loneliness is one of those conditions. It doesn't discriminate between men or women. It happens the same or in different cultures. But one thing it does show is that it particularly affects our Generation Z. This is our first generation that have been raised on screens, and they are more likely to feel lonely, and they self-report worse health conditions, particularly mental health, in this generation than in any other. You would think it was the elderly that would say, I'm more lonely, but actually it's this generation. And the number of school-age children that are hospitalized for either suicidal thoughts or attempts has doubled since 2008. Because they are spending more time alone. They're spending more time on their screens. And actually, again, the equation, screen time doesn't equal happiness, was an interesting one for me. And heavy use of social media is proven to increase the risk of clinical depression. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, these are faceless worlds that are telling people what they should be like or what they should be doing. No one's actually listening. And what that does is it simply makes you feel that you don't fit in, and it increases people's anxiety and also their pressure to conform. So I think those were the things that I took from that whole mental health piece. We understand that listening is a challenge, and it takes effort, but you need to want to choose to do that. And it doesn't seem to be a choice that particularly our youngsters are making nowadays.
Yeah, that's really good summary. Thank you, Alyson. I think one of the things I read was about the feeling with kind of the social technologies that you're socially connected, but actually you're not, because as you said, it's kind of an addiction to screen time almost. So Rebecca, have you got any views, comments on what Alyson's just talked through?
Yeah, I mean, yes, agree. I think the other kind of big thing that I picked up from specifically that chapter, which I don't know much about mental health beyond what the layperson knows, was this idea of the attachment theory. So the kind of, if you grow up in an environment where you're not listened to, and you're kind of vying for attention as a young child, you then statistically are more likely to grow up not being able to listen or not being a good listener. And I thought it was really evidence-based, interesting to kind of hear actually how you're raised as a young child really does impact your ability to listen in later life. That and it reflects on what you're saying, right? If you're sitting in front of a screen in your younger life, then you're not learning how to have a conversation and therefore how to do that two-way. So that was one of the kind of quotes that I've told everybody about, because I thought it was incredibly interesting.
Yeah, Agree. And it was a really young age, wasn't it? When they say the impact, I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but it was very young. Gill, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, I would certainly echo this thing. And the thing, as Alyson was talking and as I was reading it, we've just been at 2 years of really distorted social contact. And it shows us why we actually need face-to-face time in the flesh, to see people and pick up, as it goes in later in the book, on all these sort of little nuances of the facial expressions. There is another book which is in my pile to read, because our 32 senses. So if we have 32 senses, in order to use them, we perhaps need to be a lot closer to people. We pick up on quite a bit on the screen, but it's just not the same as actually being face to face and actually learning to pick up on those things and learning to pay attention. And I think as well, just like Rebecca, I was really interested to see about attachment, read about the attachment theory. Because I think one of the things about this book is she's linked it back to the science a lot of time. It's been linked back to fact. It's been linked back to things like attachment theory. It's been linked to the way the brain works. And all the way that underpins many chapters in the book, how much were you listened to as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I like that I've just remembered is where she talked about the difference between kind of vision and hearing, and that nature gave you eyelids so that you can shut off what you see, but nothing to actually shut off what you hear. And I thought that was a really interesting thought as well. So,
and if you think about children, particularly in things like education, when somebody says, listen to me, that's quite a strong statement, and it probably triggers that sort of reaction that you have. If your parents had said, listen up, or, you're not listening, or that sort of thing, it probably has quite a lot of negative connotations for a small child.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think we could talk about this one for ages, but in the interest of time, I'm going to head on to the next question now. So this one was for Rebecca. So there's quite a lot in the book about sort of business listening and sort of talking about Fortune 500 companies and what their courses might be like. So could you just talk a bit about the perceived flaws in a typical business active listening course? So over to you, Rebecca.
So when I read this bit, I've done that course, right? I used to work in the corporate world. And so first it made me laugh, right? Oh yeah, I remember those courses. And then it sort of metaphorically made me cry, in the sense of, from what I've learned from the book, it really, really wasn't good teaching what we were getting. So for anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of that training course, to sum it up incredibly quickly, it's smile and nod training. So kind of look like you're listening, do all these kind of faces. And it's kind of repeat back what you just said in different words, right? So I've listened to you because I've, changed your words, but said back to you what you said. And what the book talks about is yes, that is listening in the sense of, if I give you an instruction and you repeat it back to me, good, we've communicated. But it only really works on those incredibly simple, non-emotional pieces of communication. And the book, what I really found interesting about the book, and I wish this was the training that I would have got, is it talks about two things. The really listening is about understanding why someone said something. So what is the kind of sense they're trying to get across, and people's inability to often not only formulate what they're trying to say in their own brain, but then articulate that. And so it talks about, so it gives you there's a little story about a guy who's lost his job, I think, and he's sort of saying to someone, I've lost my job, and his tone slightly changes. And he says, I'm really worried about telling my family. And sort of not listening is going, oh, don't worry, you'll get another job. Proper listening is picking up on that slight tonal change and recognizing what he's really worried about is telling his wife. And that's the big difference. And I think the other piece that I was like, this is gold dust, is your job as a listener is to help the speaker articulate what they're trying to say. So it's recognizing, it's not just assuming the person has the perfectly formed piece of information and listening is absorbing that. It's actually listening is about working out, okay, how can I help them form their thoughts as they say them, and ask open questions in the right, probing in the right bits to get at it. And going back to the business context, that is good selling, right? Either selling to a client or selling your idea internally, selling everyone now needs to use this new app, or what have you. It's understanding people's feelings, and certainly the training I got really missed a trick, not just giving you those two relatively simple and obvious when you hear it pieces of advice, right? But that helping the speaker say what they mean I'd never heard that definition of listening before. But that's it, right? I feel listened to means you're a good listener, not what you did. It's what we did that determines whether or not you're a good listener. So
that's good. Yeah, I think I remember the bit where she said almost no one is flawlessly eloquent, and I thought actually that's quite a good summary, isn't it? Because who can clearly articulate exactly what they're feeling every time. So okay. So Gill, do you want to kind of respond to what Rebecca's been saying?
Well, I think all of that, and that real thinking, that deep listening, which is just so absent.
Yeah.
And it is that listening carefully, but people aren't very patient to listen. But also, I've been with some clients who expect you, when they're giving you the brief, perhaps, for what they're doing, expect you to be coming out with 1,000 ideas. I exaggerate to make a point at the same time. Whereas if you try to listen really carefully, as I always do when I meet a client and take a brief before we write the proposal, I want to listen really carefully and then ask some questions, then go away and think about it. But often clients can get quite impatient with you for listening to them, which is quite odd as well. So we have various points in business where people don't value listening, including the people who should be glad you're listening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Alyson?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about what we do in terms of our coaching activities is very much this whole thing about plugging into real life. And the value of the listening is in the deeper listening is what's the underlying message, not necessarily what they're saying. What do you need to take from that? And the other thing that she does say in the book is listening helps you understand yourself as much as those that are speaking to you, which I think in a coaching relationship is really important, because you mentioned things like how does it make you feel, all those sorts of things. I think that whole listening can throw up an awful lot of like you say, triggers, things that remind you of situations that can also be quite helpful when you're coaching somebody.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so you can see there's a few comments coming through. So Paul's been saying listening to really understand the situation rather than listening to respond.
Yes.
I think that's good, and actually Paul's probably a bit bored with me talking about this, but I took quite a lot from the whole shift response and support response, which is a bit later in the book, but I think it does relate to this section as well, and it just basically means that when you're talking to someone, the type of questions they ask you, so you may have someone asking you really personal questions, and actually they don't need to know that level of information, whereas they should be asking you much more supportive questions. So that's kind of what he's getting out there. So John here is the owner of the group that Rebecca and I are in. So he's saying here, listening is waiting for your turn to speak. So yeah, he's not. Yes, not equal to. Yeah, okay. Excellent. Okay, so next question then. So we're going into Gill this time. So what is it about the inner dialogue that is so important for your own decision making? So this is chapter 11, and this is another really, really interesting section. So Gill, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, we all have inner dialogue where we talk to ourselves in our heads. And sometimes that's helpful and sometimes it's not so helpful. It's interesting, we engage the same parts of our brain when we're talking to ourselves, even if we're doing it silently, as we would do it when we're talking to another person. But what I found was really interesting, because I've done a lot of work on inner dialogue in the past, mainly the critical inner dialogue, is listening to others throughout your life determines the tone and quality of the inner dialogue. So the more you lent your ears, or when you were young, learnt to listen, whether it was people listening to you, so therefore you learnt to listen, is you've absorbed lots of different ideas and different thoughts, so that when you're having this inner dialogue, you will have a greater range of thoughts and possibilities coming to mind than if you'd never learnt to listen and never listened to others. Which probably, if it comes to somebody like me, means you can sit and ruminate for a lot longer and be quite indecisive sometimes. But it's also been, it fosters what they call cognitive complexity. So the idea of being able to balance lots of ideas in your head at once and think through them. So if we think what that means, so for a child that's going to school and when they're embarking upon a huge learning journey, just think of the advantage they're setting off with if they've been listened to and learnt to listen.
Yeah.
Number one, how they behave at school, but they're starting off, if you like, even at the age of 4 or 5, with more cognitive complexity, more able to take in different ideas. And as they go through the education process, because they're able to listen more, they will absorb more. And when you just think about the difference that makes to life chances, it really did, when I started to really analyse that, made a really different thing. The other thing with cognitive complexity, it means you can tolerate a much greater range of views. So there is the other part in the books where people get scared of hearing other people's views. I think we see that a lot on social media at the moment. People coming back with dreadful phrases if they see somebody express something they don't like. But again, this cognitive complexity we can cope with has been associated with having more involved parents. Well, there's no surprise there, I've been listened to. But also with higher socioeconomic status. But there's a difficult, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Maybe because they listened more, they have more cognitive complexity. So you can see how it all goes round, is in circle. But it's also this, how you listen to yourself, does it affect how you hear other people as well? Because often whether you're getting the voices, you'll hear their voices, and when you're talking to yourself, you'll often hear it in their voice. And I can think of lots of encouraging things I think would have come from my grandparents, and I still hear it in my grandmother's voice as well. But obviously we also do get critical inner voice as well, and that can be, it's all your fault or it's all my fault. And it's interesting, and I'm sure those Alyson and Sarah will agree with me, we work quite a lot with critical inner voices when you're coaching people, and it's often what can really pull people down. But if they've got a good range of things that they've listened to about the inner dialogue, you can then use that to help them adjust what they listen to, if you like, adjust the gremlins they listen to in their head. But that, where it gets too critical, it can distort what people hear as well, because they're listening to it and the inner dialogue drowns it, can actually drown it out. And if you're listening too much to your inner dialogue sometimes, when somebody's talking to you, you're listening to your inner dialogue and you're not doing that full attention and being in the moment and listening to the person who's talking. So it just shows you the amount of energy that will take to dampen your own inner voice and to listen and just be completely in the moment as well. So I found it really quite interesting and a very much very different take on inner voice, but again supported by, if you like, all the research as well. But she also talks about how people really can't bear to be perhaps alone with their thoughts nowadays. Whereas before, when you were sitting in the dentist surgery, when you looked at the few magazines that were 3 years out of date, you just have to sit and wait and be with your thoughts. But people don't like that now. They'd rather fiddle with their screen, you know, rather than just sit there and think or look out of the window and think what a great day it is today, or in case of today, what a wet day it is. So I found it a really, really fascinating view about inner dialogue, that this whole one for me about the cognitive complexity. I mean, listening means you can actually cope with a greater range of views and opinions, and that's so important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jill. So I see John's made a comment here. So we should be wary of the comforting drone of the echo chambers of social media. Listen to other viewpoints is the hallmark of the enlightened. So brilliant. Thank you, John. So Rebecca, have you got anything to add to what Jill said?
Yeah, so completely agree. What was really interesting was the study, was it in Japan, that they did about how your inner voice is actually louder than external voices or noises. I thought that was incredibly interesting. And the piece about your internal voice being a kind of a makeup and influenced by what you've heard, who you've listened to, all the rest of it. When I first heard that, I sort of was a bit taken aback, and I thought, no, that's my special inner voice that nobody else can hear. And then I kind of reflected on it a bit more, and I thought, well, actually, some of the voices are physical voices that you've heard. Some of the voices are, like we can now hear her voice, even though I've never actually heard her voice, right? And so it kind of took me a minute to work to kind of accept that. But then once you do, I think actually you can have a far richer conversation with yourself, right? And really dial up that, I forget the terminology used, but like the good one versus the bad one, because this isn't just me, this is a collection of all the wonderful people that I've got in my life, or had in my life, or been influenced by the billions of business books that I've read. I really like that bit.
Yeah, it's good. And I listen to this on Audible, so I have heard her voice, and I do keep hearing her say things now, so it's really good. It's good. So Alyson, your thoughts on this bit?
I think what struck me, and when Jill was talking as well, is the amount of time. So, actually in the book she talks about, we actually start listening before we're even born. Yeah. So, in the whole, in the womb, we start to hear things from that age, and actually our hearing is the last thing that goes as well. Yeah. So, it's there for the whole of your life. And if you think about the amount of time we are listening to other people, and we build up all of that those thoughts, and beliefs, and things that ways of interpreting things, that cause us to have a slightly negative bias towards the way we think about things. It's understandable. You get to the point where you think, gosh, I've had so many things that have happened, or learnt experiences, or things that have happened in my childhood onwards, that have caused me to be feeling this way. And when you start to unpick that, particularly in a coaching scenario, it can be very interesting.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's a couple of comments up. So Claire is saying it's fascinating to think about how important children's experience of being listened to and learning to listen is the ability to balance the inner voice later in life. So yes, absolutely. And John, so John's saying, since screens probably aren't going away, are there ideas on improving communication in today's world without longing for the good old days? Rebecca, have you got any thoughts on that?
I don't remember there specifically being ideas like that in the book, other than awareness, right? So other than recognizing when you're listening to social media, that isn't representative of the world. That's a subsection. And I think it's all the things we've been talking about. I'm not a parent myself, but it's parenting either as mother or father, but also kind of more collective parenting, right? Giving young people the opportunity to be listened to, so they recognize the difference and can build up the cast in their internal play that they've got running for themselves. But it doesn't specifically about that in the book, I don't think.
No, I mean, I know it talks quite a lot, doesn't it, about the whole things on social media. The viral posts tend to be the things that are shocking rather than the kind of the mundane or the normal. So it is about that perspective, isn't it? Like you say, to make sure that people know that's not reality. And I guess limiting screen time is kind of a thing that most parents will attempt to do. But I guess talking to your children is the way forward, really.
And I think that's an interesting thing, because they learn from you. So I had this conversation with a friend the other day who was saying that the child was sort of not being listened to when she was getting ready for school, but the reason was both of her parents were sat at the breakfast table on their phone. And you just think, where do you get that from then? So,
I think we always have, when my girls were younger, it was meals around a table, no phones at the table. And it was a time for dialogue. And, how's your school day been? Or when they were out at work, how's your day been? All that sort of stuff comes out. And it also makes the meal more enjoyable. It makes more of an occasion out of a meal as well. And I think just that general rule, no screens, this is the time for discourse.
Yeah.
As well.
So I think we've probably shown we could be talking about this book all day, but I am conscious of time, and we said 30 minutes, so we are up. So I'm going to just put up a note for final thought. So Gill, have you got kind of a final thought about the book or the topic in general?
I think generally, I think you'll know when you've been listening well, because you'll be absolutely exhausted.
Okay, good. Yeah. Rebecca?
Yeah, I think the only one thing that we didn't talk about that I loved is everyone is interesting, and it's on it's your job to listen to and figure out why. And that one sentence has completely changed how I interact with other people. When it's my job to listen and work out why you're interesting, suddenly the world becomes a much more interesting place.
Brilliant, thank you. Alyson?
And I think that listening is more of a mindset. It's a skill that develops over time. And by interacting with all different kinds of people, it can help you connect, to understand other people, and also to love other people.
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, I've already typed it up, but listening continues after the conversation is finished and when you're reflecting. And I think that's something that you don't necessarily think of, but later on when you're kind of replaying that conversation, I think that's a really, really good point.
Yeah.
So hopefully everyone's enjoyed it, and you'll be coming back next time. So this is the bit we've decided on. So this is a bit that Alyson's just recommended. So The Well-Gardened Mind by Susan Stewart Smith. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. I will post an event nearer to the time. I would guess it will probably be in a month or so, but we will confirm that. So thank you very much to everyone who has joined us, and thank you so much, Gill, Alyson and Rebecca. I've really, really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And see you next time. So I'm just going to put up a slide to kind of finish. So bye for now. Thanks, everyone.